Hi there, and welcome to the podcast Life as a show intently focused on exploring and unearthing the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. There are several defining elements of living within the 21st century. And technology would certainly be one for the sheer impact it has had on our lives. You could also argue that war and disease have also made an early mark as well, in terms of defining ways of life and living for many of us around the world. However, there is one more undeniably pertinent detail, which has truly shifted our mindsets, disrupted industry, and impacted lives. What I'm referring to, of course, is the environment and issues of sustainability. Our way of life, our future as a living organism on this planet, no less, is unquestionably tied into how well we manage this issue. Prognosticators have not been overly optimistic about things moving forward based on our track record of managing the environment to this point. However, this has not stopped companies and people like our guest today from taking a stand and attempting to leverage all of what we have at our disposal as far as knowledge and tech to effect positive change relating to the environment. Lynn Petesch is the head of customer success at Overstory, a climate tech vegetation intelligence company that is using satellite imagery to analyze and understand the world's vegetation with a particular focus on mitigating wildfires. Before launching herself into tech and companies focused on helping to solve the climate crisis, Lynn had actually started her career in the public sector working for the United Nations World Food Program and then in the diplomatic service of her home country, Luxembourg. She quickly realized that while intellectually stimulating, she was not going to be a public servant and decided to break into the fast-paced world of tech startups, specifically B2B software as a service companies. And she's been part of the tech startup world for the past 10 years in London and currently New York. Lynn built a successful career building customer-facing teams called customer success in startup land for multiple high-growth companies across different industries. She worked across the fintech and marketing tech world, but then decided to marry her passion of solving important issues impacting humanity with her skill set in building teams in high-growth companies and join the burgeoning world of climate tech. Lynn realized that you don't have to be a solar engineer to work at a climate tech company. Anyone can turn their career into a climate positive one. Investment in the industry has tripled in recent years, and a lot of different skill sets are needed in order to attack the problem from varying angles. With all that in mind, Lynn, welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. I think what your company does, and it's absolutely fascinating, and I think also your career arc as well. It's quite compelling. So I'm really eager to get into all of it.
Quite the journey.
Yeah, totally. The first segment here is something called Coloring Wikipedia, and basically, as my listeners would know, I take the guest profession as defined by Wikipedia and just sort of read off the definition. I like to do it for a couple of reasons. One, I think it brings everyone up to speed, and then two, it offers like a nice jumping off point, I think, for the guest to explore the profession as defined by Wikipedia. Now, I do have a bit of bad news. Wikipedia doesn't have a definition of your profession, but I can, I have been able to improvise here, and I found something online here which sort of encapsulates it. But I will throw this qualifier in. It is incredibly basic, so maybe after listening to it, you can sort of relate it to what you do at Overstory. Anyway, let me read that off for you here. Head of Customer Success, and I'll ask for your comments after. Here goes. Customer success heads are responsible for understanding what their customers want, how to improve their experiences in the product, and increasing customer loyalty. Again, super basic, I know. But yeah, maybe you could speak to each of those points. Maybe that would be the best way to kind of kick things off.
Sure. It does encapsulate that. And I think it is kind of a new function within, it's a function of every B2B SaaS company. In all startups, you have like account management, customer success teams right now, but it's true that sort of like in terms of the definition, it can also mean slightly different things in different companies.
That's
right.
But
what it does mean at essence is sort of like everything post-sales. everyone sells a product, whether it's a software product or any other kind of product. And then there's this, you go on this like year-long journey with a customer, which in my world has always entailed an onboarding phase, an implementation of a certain software that includes, what does the customer want? How do we get them to value? What do we need to do to get them from A to B to Z ultimately? How do they, track adoption? Do they actually use our products? A lot of these startups are bringing something completely new to the table. So how do we make sure customers see the value, they start using it? And ultimately, it obviously comes into do they want to renew the contracts? Do they want to buy more stuff? How do we get these customers to be real champions of our brand, like that they talk about us, that they refer us to other customers? So it kind of entails everything that is in the post-sales world.
Yeah.
But yeah, the kind of nuances of it are always a bit different depending on the company.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess in terms of like what you do at Overstory, could you maybe fill listeners in a little bit about that? Maybe you making reference to some of the, I don't know, points of what you just spoke about as they relate to that company?
Totally. Yeah. So at Overstory, it's really interesting because we kind of have this new technology that is like using remote sensing or satellite imagery, and we're applying it to, and in our case, it's right now electric utilities that are really kind of focused on using that to understand their vegetation. But it's like a new technology that we bring to that kind of sector. They're already kind of like playing around with it and dipping their toes into it, but there's a lot more sort of education to be done. And so I think that's a key differentiator. Sometimes, you have companies that just know they want to go buy an analytics platform. So they go out there and they find an analytics provider and they buy one, versus here it's sort of like, we know there's new technologies out there. We want to test them. We want to see what value they bring. So the focus is much more on that value proposition. My work is much more focused on, obviously, like we have geospatial engineers, we get the imagery, we kind of process it, we lay it into our product. There's a whole kind of implementation that goes on from that perspective. But I think my work is much more focused on really, really understanding our customers' needs. What are they trying to achieve with this technology, and how can we prove that?
Yeah. And
it makes it kind of more interesting because it becomes much more of a consultative approach versus just sort of rolling something out and then like going with it.
Yeah, totally. I'd imagine as well, I mean, anything within tech and obviously like the industry you're within, I mean, it's evolving rapidly, right? I mean, even just in the top in the bio, I mean, the investment is tripled, I guess it's one statistic that's out there. So with that in mind, I'm sure there's just constant change. It's just like a constant churning of information that's coming in. And then obviously like companies like yours that you're working within are leveraging a lot of that. And some of your customers probably too. I mean, certainly they have an interest. That's why you've developed some sort of relationship with them, but also too, probably like they don't fully grasp or comprehend all that is capable. So it's constantly like, not only for yourself, you're probably learning, what we can do, what are our limits, but then also too, it's about probably educating the customers about all these different options, or perhaps even at times just narrowing down and trying to find exactly what they want to do in terms of all the possibilities. I'm guessing that would also be part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. We're kind of like almost like educating each other. We're learning a lot about from the customer about what it is actually they need to achieve with vegetation management.
Right.
And then we're teaching them about how they can start using satellite imagery. And there's other technologies in the remote sensing, it could be LiDAR technology or drones. But I think now we know that like satellites at scale can do a lot. And it's fascinating what we can do. We can see like the health of trees. We can kind of identify tree species from satellites and really kind of make them understand where the risks are. This is all, with the goal of, preventing wildfires versus just sort of like reacting to them. So it is, but yeah, it's kind of this mutual education that is constantly going on. And as a early stage company, also, we're learning a lot from our early customers. And then we gotta educate them about how we can kind of implement our technology within their processes and make it valuable for them. Like they're not going to spend money if we can't actually influence the work they're doing afterwards.
It must be exciting for both parties involved, I would imagine, like what you're uncovering and all these different capabilities, like you're doing this 1 week, but 3 months later, suddenly you're able to take it to a different level just because of the technological rate of change and everything else. And then obviously for the customers, getting wind of that, well, this is what we just did, but now the possibilities are going to be this, and this within, a couple more months. It must be really exciting.
Yeah, I think in satellite imagery, and I'm also still, learning a lot about this. I think the prices are like, going down, and then the resolution of how you can now use high resolution imagery is a bit newer. So there's a lot of, and then obviously we're a company that's building out the product. So we're constantly releasing new functionality to kind of prove more value to the customers. So there's kind of like, we're building a product from scratch. So there's definitely a lot that we can, continuously release, and it's changing very quickly.
Yeah. On the flip side of things too, it must be a bit of a challenge, I would guess, at times too, whereas like, this is just sort of like an idea that popped in my head. I had a guest on recently, an MIT professor, and her specialty was within urban planning and big data. And she was saying that, like, obviously technology is great and everything that she does, but it also creates, a challenge at times where, like, speaking of satellite imagery, when she had started, they were able to like pinpoint like down to like 15 meters by 15 meters. But then now where technology is at, like they're pixelating down to like a piece of grass, and they have to like get out, zoom back out to be able to get a better idea or a clear understanding of like the space that they're working with now. So like the technology is so good that they have to almost like dial it back now, which creates sometimes, issues at different points. Probably.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's that, but then I'm sure like sort of we're looking at a lot of like 30 centimeter, which is like pretty small when you look, even
right.
like so much bigger. Yeah. But I think we're also like our customers, they actually have foresters, and those people are used to going on the ground and looking at the tree and identifying. And so I think it's also that kind of convincing, how can we can't replace a person standing in front of a tree and deciding what the health of the tree is and what type of a tree it is, but we can empower these people to kind of see it at scale and identifying like where is your risk areas and how do you kind of like attack them. So it's also like, I think often it is about like empowering, technology can sometimes be threatening to certain people's jobs as well. And this is sort of a lot, and this is not just in my company, it's sort of like empowering people to get elevate their work with technology or the solutions that are out there.
Okay. In terms of what you do specifically, maybe we could return to that. What would be a typical day for you, or even say a typical week, perhaps?
Right. I mean, in CS, it's sort of customer success. Right. I mean, there's always the sessions you have there. You want to talk to your customers as often as possible. So you probably have a bunch of calls scheduled. One is, delivering a project to a customer, like onboarding another customer. Where, at one point it'll be like some customer was something's not working, or like we got to fix the problem, or kind of like do something new with them. And then you're having at the same time a conversation with one customer about, I don't know, renewing a contract, or like, so kind of it changes a lot throughout the day, which I think is why it's exciting. You're kind of also at the intersection about like constantly communicating with the product team around like, we got a lot of feedback that the customers want this type of functionality. How can we build that? And, that communication point, making sure from sales, we have a seamless handover into the customer success so that we don't, repeat everything with the customer. So I think we kind of sit at the intersection of like all these other teams internally. And then the day, I mean, if everything goes well, you obviously have your meetings planned, but then there's always like
big asterisks there.
Right. It's kind of, dividing your time between onboarding and then, focusing on existing customers, and then customers that are still in a trial stage, and then customers that are renewing, and kind of it's sort of a little bit like spread across that entire life cycle. And again, the reason why there's many interactions is because, you want to have these customers for many years and kind of evolve with them.
Gotcha. Okay. Before we move on to the next segment here, just to paint like a clearer picture, I guess, of what your company does per se, maybe, I don't know if you could shed some light on, say, like who would be a typical customer for your company, and what would their needs be, and how does your company sort of serve those needs in essence? If that makes sense, maybe you could expand on that.
A lot of our customers right now are electric utility companies, so co-ops. That's like a bit of an American thing, sort of how they kind of organize themselves here, who, if you think about it, they manage, there's the power lines that run in the US, across the Rocky Mountains and into like areas that are also very wildfire prone right now. Unfortunately, you hear it all around the news that there's tons of wildfires in California, Colorado, Montana, I mean, all along the West Coast, really. Texas, even everywhere. And what these companies are responsible for is the right of way. So if you think about the power lines that are running through towns and urban areas and rural areas, the areas around it, and sort of there's a buffer kind of like decided on. There's no vegetation allowed to be in there to touch the lines, because that ignites a lot of wildfires. And so these people need to understand their, thousands of miles of power lines and make sure that they're not posing a risk to igniting new wildfires, for example. And so a tree falling into a power line can, damage their assets, create an outage for their customers, which is not great. But then our purpose is on top of that, is kind of like wildfire, do not ignite additional wildfires. They're being held more liable for these kind of fires that they may spark themselves. So there's a huge budget actually allocated within utility companies towards vegetation management. And so they need to understand their network at scale. And right now they're doing it, there's crews going around in like year-long cycles, trimming trees and understanding it. And you don't want to like just chop them all off. You want to be a bit careful about, these need to be trimmed. This is a dead tree that could fall into the line. This is an area that is wildfire risk. This needs to be prioritized of the other one. It's a whole world in of itself.
It's really interesting though, yeah.
Exactly. And so, satellite imagery just gives them that network level view about where their risks are. So we can risk rank and say, like, in that area, you've got that % of tree cover that encroaches into your right of way, and you should be prioritizing that. And actually this area, there are no trees even, so don't bother driving there. Wasting
your resources on
and
that.
And then I'm giving you the very sort of basic level.
No.
That's one element of sort of what we do, but that's a kind of a customer that needs to deal with this type of management. We also worked with the Rainforest Alliance and kind of other organizations that try to understand forests for like deforestation projects, etc., at scale. But I think our key vertical that we're focused on right now is these utility companies.
It's quite fascinating. I mean, obviously, like you just spoke about, these wildfires. I mean, in the last few years, we've been having so many more, not just within North America, but around the world, essentially, right? And Australia has been hit particularly hard. And we're probably going to get into this later on, but, that's a problem, certainly a problem. But there is like reason for optimism at times. And I think it ties into like, stories like this or companies like this that are finding ways to leverage technology to try to offset or mitigate some of these issues at hand. But I'll save that for a little bit later in the conversation. But it is, it's nice to hear that there are, I wouldn't say solutions necessarily, but at least there are at times perhaps workarounds to some of these problems that we are facing. So with that in mind, maybe we can skip on over into a new segment here, something called a Q&A discovery. We can just kind of continue this back and forth. I'd like to lead off with this first question here, though. So again, in the intro, I sort of briefly introduced listeners to your past as a public servant and how that wasn't exactly the career path that you wanted. But maybe you could shed a little bit more light about what pulled you into the world of tech and in startups. I mean, just a cursory glance at both. I mean, they're so utterly different in terms of pace and action, and I'm sure you can speak to that point quite a bit. But yeah, maybe you could fill listeners in a little bit on that.
Sure. I mean, I studied politics, and so politics, international relations. I, did some work with NGOs and at European Union, et cetera. And so, landing my first job at the United Nations that's why I cannot at all downplay it. It was like an absolute dream come true, right?
Yeah.
Feeling like you're in
changing the world, maybe, or have an opportunity to do so, right?
Exactly. Like I always had that like humanitarian bone in there. Sort of in me, and feeling like you're at the forefront of politics and really understanding that. And then I spent time with them in Geneva, which is the humanitarian headquarters, which was phenomenal. Then moved to Brussels. There I got approached by the Luxembourg Foreign Office, so I worked for them for a while as well, which included sitting at European Union meetings, NATO meetings. It was phenomenal. It was great, and I think I think a lot of people don't understand why I would have not pursued that, but I think it is about a personal choice. And I think I had I think you really committed as a public servant to that kind of lifestyle also that comes with it. And I think for me, I guess I realized over time that I had that more like business, entrepreneurial kind of focus as well. And, nobody tells you, I mean, at least for me as a child, nobody told me, maybe as a woman or just as a young woman in Luxembourg, like that I was going to work in tech startups. That was just like, that was not a thing, right? And I think after leaving the public sector, I moved back to London, and I was kind of just like screening my friends that I studied with, where are they at, what are they doing? And sort of while kind of going across a little bit and being introduced to different people, I remember I met the co-founder of the company, the fintech company that I joined.
Okay.
I remember just starting with them thinking, I'll do this while I'm looking for a real job because I thought it was a fun project. And here we are, 10 years later, I'm, pretty much full on in the software and like, B2B startup world. But yeah, no, and I kind of stumbled into it. And I think a lot of people stumble into tech, maybe not these days, but definitely, I don't know, 15 years ago, I very much felt like that. But I guess it fits me more personally in terms of like work ethic, work style, like how you can actually do things from scratch, how you can make a real big impact, and you're not a little cog in a kind of big wheel.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And just the change, the rate of change and the ability to affect things, obviously within public service, it's a little bit slower, a few more approvals perhaps are needed to advance agendas and so on and so forth. Whereas within tech, it's just like you're constantly, there's a lot of iteration going on there. And it's exciting, I think. Not to say that the other isn't, but it's faster. The pace is quicker, I would guess. And that to some would be certainly an attractive element.
It's more of a roller coaster as well.
Yeah.
Like which also comes with its downs. It's always like, you never know if your company is going to make it. You always have a bit more risk. And, things are much more volatile in many ways than the public sector for sure. But I think, again, it's a personal choice whether that is something you thrive in or something that kind of intimidates you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Having the background in that side and then where you're at right now probably is a bit unique. I'm guessing that you might have a bit of a unique stance or viewpoints to what you're doing right now, just based on some of those past experiences. So it probably serves you well in different capacities. Okay. Well, I have another question here. So again, I understand that with Overstory, you joined that company not that long ago, relatively speaking. And what was that specific, I guess, pull to joining that company per se?
Yeah, I think that was a very kind of like a focused search in a way that I did. I transitioned into tech, which I loved. And I think building my career in CS and kind of coming into that kind of function and like growing in there has been really great. Yeah. And I did it in sort of the fintech space, as you alluded to earlier, and then moved into marketing. And I think, and maybe this is sort of like my COVID realization, but I think, I kind of came to the point where I was like, I do kind of want to marry that early career kind of focus on wanting to work on important things and like in the world and like big problems. And now I have 10 years of experience in building these teams and like these functions out. How can I not marry the two together? And I think a lot of people had that maybe after, spending a lot of time at home, sort of like connecting to what's actually more, in line with your values and a little bit more important to you. And so I'm definitely not the only one, but I kind of like just made the decision to go after it. And I came across, so I think the decision was made that in my next job search, I was going to prioritize the industry and really find an industry that I want to be a part of for the next 10 to 20 years and like navigate through. And then I think there's a lot of talk around climate tech. There's a lot of investment going into it. There's a lot of new startups coming up. There's a really well organized community around it that I very much also enjoyed kind of networking in. And I think when that kind of all came together, I became like very laser focused on actually going after that. Yeah. But then it's about like finding the right company. I wanted an early stage company, and like obviously like they need to have a role that fits your,
your skill set essentially. Yeah.
Right. So I think for me after some point, but I also like took my time, and I knew it was going to take a little bit of time to find the right thing.
Right. Well, it sounds like you did. I mean, based on what you explained right now, obviously what they're doing, their mission essentially it would be rewarding to work within. And also, not only that, we already spoke to this point a few times over, but just the excitement with it as well. The technological change is constantly happening. And then, feeling that you are able to make an impact and affect things in a positive manner. It's got to be rewarding on several different levels. Of course, I know there's probably challenge and everything that goes along with that. But at the same time, it does sound quite exciting just looking at it from the outside.
Yeah, I think there's something unique when you hire based on like mission alignment across your employee base. And when you know that that's the thing that's tying everyone together, I think that's a unique and exciting place to be in.
Yeah. Well, with that point in mind, maybe it's we can segue into another question here. In the work so far and what you have been doing, has there been any, I don't know, particular piece of information or maybe imagery or anything that sort of like stood out to you, that's hit you in a funny way, in a positive manner, that is, or struck you in some sort of fashion that is remained with you? Has there been anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was in these like more earlier stage, I think conversations with Overstory, it was also like, it was at the time when the COP conference was ongoing. And I think obviously at that point, everyone was talking about it, but it is, the goals are so clear. You have, you have the goals for 2030, you have goals for 2050.
Yeah.
And it just felt like there was this momentum behind, like, everyone should just, you can contribute in very many different ways. Not everyone can go work in a specific climate tech company, but I think it was this kind of conscious that came up, and it's like everyone should work towards it. And I think the number, it's kind of like driven by numbers, and there's a million ways to get to the emissions goals. But I think if everyone kind of like attacks it from different angles, and for me it was sort of something like a little bit tangible to hold on to. I also remember, in December, there were these like crazy wildfires in Boulder, a city that I really like visiting. And it felt very relevant and very like, this is winter and you have wildfires in Colorado.
Right.
And they're incredibly dangerous. And yeah, so I think it felt very relevant, and it kind of all came kind of into place. I guess around the time that I was like actually like speaking to this company. And so it felt very much kind of remotivated me to like really continue these conversations and focus on it.
Yeah. No, I hear you completely on that. I mean, I feel like every day, just, getting onto social media, there's always, of course, different things, different statistics, different imagery that's constantly being, put before you. And I feel like, it's always something that's standing out at the moment that's hitting you in a funny way. Like,
I spent time in Montana last summer, and there was definitely like wildfires you could see popping up everywhere. And now we have customers there who say wildfire season is now all year long. It's not a May to September kind of issue anymore. And even like I'm based out of New York, but there were a couple of months ago where like the air was like all reddish, and it was like the wildfire from California that like literally see it in the air pollution all the way up to New York. I think it's something no one can avoid anymore. You have it in Europe as well, in Spain, in Portugal. So
that's exactly
stuck in their heads of like
right. Yeah, based on their own experiences now. Exactly. I was just about to bring that point up as well. It's the air quality issues as well, that even if you're not geographically like set within that area that's at risk for these wildfires, you're still going to be hit by some of the after effects of it all. So yeah, it's real and it's hitting hard, most definitely. Okay. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I do have one more question within this segment, and it's a bit more on the personal side of things. Be curious to know about how this profession has impacted you personally. At times, probably some of these statistics or imagery, it must be hard to kind of like take it all in. Perhaps maybe even seeing some trends that are coming down the line that maybe aren't all that great. What does that do to your stress levels, perhaps, or maybe there's different elements within the job that run you ragged at times. I don't know. Maybe you can speak to that. I'll go to the positive after. Don't worry.
Listen, it's like not like, joining this company or any other one is like, we're going to solve it all. I think it's sort of like, again, like, I guess maybe now again, you're like that little cog in a big wheel, but it is very, very satisfying to know you're working on something that is like working on a topic, even if it's very broad, that like you care about personally, right? That's a fact. And I think that's been why I was very happy to join this company, but also just like stick to that decision to enter the world of climate tech, and why it's not a decision for just this company. It's like for, my career, basically. I think that was sort of satisfactory. I mean, yes, then sometimes you read the news around, like, you know, the Brazilian president who is going to try and ruin everything before getting out of power, and it's depressing. Or you hear, you know, like how, you know, even the conflict in Ukraine right now is kind of like, it's not top of mind anymore. It's like kind of almost like taking a little bit of step back because there's priorities shifts, and that's, you know, all of this is completely, you know, horrible things are happening. But I think it is, I do also think that it's more on the agenda than ever. And I think a lot of people were commenting on how at the COP conference, like, much more of the public sector, private sector, sorry, was there. And now there is a lot of talk about, like, you know, any company needing to start disclosing their, you know, scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. And I don't know, there is still like, it's there. It's like everyone's going to be confronted with it. Everyone's going to be talking about it. And then you can take an approach and be like, you know, see the half glass full or half glass empty. So I choose to see it half glass full, and like,
depending on the day,
happy that I kind of like, and it, you know, now I'm like more immersed in the topic, you know, you read more about it, you kind of like, you know, I'm surrounded by people that care about the same things, and I think that's motivating overall. So I would see that the positives are outweighing the negatives for sure.
Okay. All right. No, I think that paints a pretty clear picture, and you know, clear kind of view of that world, essentially. You know, some of the elements that could be a bit tough to work with at times, but then also too a lot of the rewarding aspects, no doubt. Okay. Well, let's go into a new segment here, something called a water cooler story. And basically it's a segment where I just ask guests to indulge listeners with a story relating to the profession. So yeah, I'll let you take it from here, Lynn, wherever you'd like to go with it.
I was like, water cooler conversations rarely happen these days.
Yeah, I know, it's a bit outdated, eh?
No, it's funny. It's, you know, I also work for a fully remote company, and there's like 2 of us in New York, but yeah, I think, you know, thinking about like stories like what was, again, and it comes back a little bit to the same thing. I think it's an industry that I found very easy to network in, and very kind of exciting to do that in. And even like we were meeting in person with everyone in the company a couple of weeks ago in Amsterdam. And we actually went to a forest and, you know, met with a forester who explained to us, you know, the forest, it was really nice to kind of see. And I think that was the conversation, or version of the water cooler conversation that was happening on a bike cycling to a forest in Amsterdam. But I think everyone was sort of like talking around, it's one thing when a company is like emission aligned, but it's kind of like being able to transfer that and actually spend a lot of time outdoors and like learn it, and having the values so easily translate was exciting. And overall, like, again, while I was like looking for this role and speaking to a bunch of other companies in the space, I thought it was very, I don't know, it's people that are kind of joined by a mission. They're like, this competition doesn't exist so much in it, because it's sort of like, as long as you contribute, as long as you help out, it's great. So I think working in that space, probably compared to like previously, whereas in marketing, where it's like, you know, everything is a little bit more competitive. Everyone wants to work with the same brand. While here, I think that how the values can translate into how people act and how people talk to each other and help each other out is actually, it was kind of a really positive thing that I noticed early on at Overstory, but also even prior, when I was just kind of like speaking to companies in this space.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something that it makes sense when I'm hearing it right now for the first time. But yeah, I guess like a company or within climate tech, like the values align a little bit better, perhaps. Obviously, say within different industries, it's, you know, profit above everything else more times than not, right? But within climate tech, maybe that mindset is a little bit different. Of course, I mean, you're out to succeed. You want your company to grow, no doubt. But there is this bigger sort of vision. There's this bigger sort of like idea of where you want to go, and the reason why you want to go here, you know, is for the betterment of, you know, our planet, essentially, right? To put it in simple terms. So there's got to be that almost synergy in a way. I mean, you're in competition with other companies, no doubt, but still there is this sort of like maybe respecting the values of one another and what you are trying to achieve ultimately. And would that be accurate?
Yeah, there's something to be said now. I mean, listen, all of these companies need to generate revenue.
Of course. Yeah, no doubt.
That's just running a business.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to be said that I think there's a realization about companies that do it the right way and work on something consistently and like have a goal in mind and run a good business versus just sort of like an aggressive business that like is gonna like go through a roof within a day is I think that's kind of a shift that we're seeing in the industry in general, that those companies do get rewarded. And that companies that are run well and are kind of like keep focused and have a clear mission and a clear kind of goal that they go after will do very well. And I think that has been proven a few times now, and there's been, and I think we'll see more of that, hopefully, at least in the future.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. We do have one more segment here that I would like to get into, and it's something called the crystal ball segment. I mean, as the name implies, we're looking more towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And I've already brought this point up already once. It's this rate of technological change, and climate tech is certainly, I'm sure, experiencing a lot of this in terms of it moving forward very quickly. So with that in mind, and considering this industry, maybe you could speak to that point a little bit. We already did to a degree, but maybe you could kind of expand on that a little bit further.
Yeah, I think that it's almost like the world is infinite. I think that was actually one of the hardest things when you hear climate tech. It can be in so many different ways,
right?
So many different technologies. So it's actually a little bit overwhelming. And I think the best way of, you kind of got to almost like break it down into different sectors. I think there's obviously the entire carbon removal technologies, and then there's this whole world or sector of climate adaptation, which probably we fall into more, and then there's the whole world of sustainability and just generally increasing awareness around it. So kind of breaking that down. But then in terms of technologies, I mean, you see like companies that are doing carbon capture, you are seeing companies that are building hardware like tools for regenerative agriculture. There's the whole world of remote sensing, which we're using in terms of the wildfire mitigation and satellite imagery. But then there's the world of carbon credit markets that are also using, remote sensing for like carbon verification. Then I haven't even spoken about the whole energy transition and like mobility and transport world, which is, probably still like one of the biggest sectors. And then there's cool things like going on, like apps to reduce food waste. And then there's the whole world of recycling and upcycling. And even though there are topics, everyone's building, whether it's an app around it or uses new technology around it. I think it's almost overwhelming, the amount of technology that is right now being applied to it. And I think that's probably why a lot of people struggle to kind of understand what it even means, because it means
so much, right? It's just so broad. As far as the environmental monitoring goes, is there any particular chatter that you're hearing about, that things that we might be seeing or might be possible, say, within the next 5 to 10 years moving forward?
I think there's a lot of work that's going into like building or rebuilding the trust in terms of like the carbon credit markets. I think that's been a little bit like the wild west. And now it's gotten a little bit of a bad rep with like everything being greenwashing. And I think there's a lot of companies right now like focus on actually using really cool technology to rebuild the trust, and actually also originating some of these projects. So I've seen a lot of that stuff, which I find also maybe it's because I find it also personally very interesting and like fascinating that I know more about it. I think remote sensing is being used on a ton of different use cases right now. So I think we'll see more of that. And again, like as more satellites are flying around,
right.
Being more precise and more accurate, and the prices are going down, I'm sure the use cases are going to increase. The world of carbon capture is like, there's so much investment in it, and it's a little bit like, for me, it's still like kind of very hard to sometimes grasp what that even means.
Same here. I just read an article about it just a few days ago, and it sort of like just blew my mind. Like, one, that what a lot of this is possible, and then two, like, how is this, and also the scale of it. I mean, to really like leverage that type of technology, what has to take place. But sorry to cut you off there.
No, and I think the last one I could think of is sort of like, there's more and more also software around like carbon accounting. And I guess that has to do with, as even I think, in the US at least, there might be new standards on how like public companies need to like report on their emissions. Well, then there needs to be the whole toolkit on how do you do that? How do you do it efficiently? How do you report on it? And I think that is just obviously there's a lot of companies already in that space, but there's probably a lot of room for improving that. And once it becomes a regulatory requirement, then it's sort of like free fall. And I mean, those companies would probably also do pretty well if they get it right.
Right. Okay. Here's one last question really quickly for you, and it might be connected to what you just spoke about. I mean, again, there's a lot of doom and gloom when we're, considering the environment and moving forward, but also at the same time, there is optimism. And maybe for you personally, it's related to a lot of this, technology, but maybe it's elsewhere. I don't know. In terms of this optimism moving forward, where do you fall within that spectrum? First off, maybe that's the first question. Like, how optimistic are you? And then secondly, what is it that kind of gives you that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it really depends on the day. I think it's
yeah,
some days you wake up and you read that, like, oh, there's all these new cool things that we can do to get to certain goals, and then you like wake up the next day and you read how the US has literally like been worse the last year than getting better. And but I think the hopeful thing is that it's on everyone's agenda, and like I don't know, like Biden has a huge climate change policy that is trying to get through, and kind of it's harder to implement on it. But I think there is, I think also the fact that the private sector is actually now required to do more. It's become like nobody wants to be the company that doesn't have any published goals. Like it's almost right. Although some of it you might say, okay, it's like fake promises, etc. The fact that pressure is there, everyone has to think it, everyone has to hire their sustainability officer or whatever it may be. And I think gradually that will obviously increase it. And then I do think like a lot more people want to contribute to this. And I think there's a big movement amongst people like me and like many others that just want to work in this field. And the more talent we have in it, well, the more progress I guess we're going to make. So
yeah, well said. I it's kind of like the feeling I get as well. I sort of like just reading through this information and speaking to people like yourself. It's just these issues of awareness and people wanting to know more, and then also demanding more from companies that, like you said, I mean, if somebody doesn't have this on their agenda and they're not addressing it adequately, they're going to be called out. And that's what we need. Obviously, of course, that's exactly what we need to keep these companies, on the straight and narrow when it comes to their actions and what they're doing to the environment, the types of effects that they can have. So, I mean, that there is reason for optimism. I think also too, I find myself at times, like, at least me personally, kind of like the worry at times is like, oh, we can just like tech our way out of these problems, which, I mean, to a certain point, perhaps, yes, but I think there's always going to be that limit if we don't start changing our own actions. There's we got to find that happy balance there. So it's, for me personally, it's kind of like shifting back and forth between those things where it's like, yeah, it's great, we're introducing all this new tech to the market where we can do this, this, and this, which is going to help offset this problem, this problem, this problem. But if we're not careful and we don't adjust our own habits, well, it's never going to be enough, really. So yeah, like you said, it probably comes back to the day, the feeling, the emotion you're having on that particular day when you're considering these issues.
Yeah, but then there's a lot of talk around like how like the generations that are younger than us, even Gen Z, like they grew up like knowing and talking about climate change, like they hear about it. I think, and I don't think at 5 years old I was able to explain climate change or was that aware of it. But now someone who's like, ask a 6 or 7 year old kid on the street, they probably would have heard about climate change, and like it's much more reality for them. And I think that generation and like Gen Z and earlier are probably much more aware of it at a very young age, and are going to probably adapt their lives much more to it, hopefully, than even our generation has.
Yeah, most definitely. All righty. Well, I think we got through everything here, Lynn, and it's been a really interesting conversation. And really thank you for your time and sharing all these insights. So yeah, thanks again for coming onto this program.
Thank you.
Yeah. For those interested in learning more about Lynn and her work, you can find and connect with her via LinkedIn or through the company she works at, Overstory, at www.overstory.com. Also, too, if you like today's show, please be sure to share. I mean, hey, I think it's great if we can learn a little bit more about one another, the stresses, the pressures, the joys, all of that stuff. And in doing so, it helps, I think, lessen that divide or that tribalism. So that's never going to be a bad thing. Please share. I think it's great. Also to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. And also to head on over to YouTube. We do have a channel there under Life as a, where you can catch full video conversations, much like the one we had today with Lynn. And each episode there starts with a slideshow too. So you can kind of add some imagery to the conversation itself. And if you do go there, please be sure to hit subscribe. Also, please be sure to tune into the next episode of Life as a, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.